Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. This podcast is a recorded panel discussion from PRI's second annual policy conference in Sacramento. This panel focuses on education. As the attack over charter schools has increased in Sacramento, one false narrative is that they don't serve the needs of special needs students. To the contrary, school choice options, including charter schools, give students the diverse educational opportunities they are seeking. This panel discusses the forthcoming PRI book, Mia's Story, and the importance of school choice and innovative approaches to learning for special needs children. You'll hear presentations from Carrie Carlson, Regional Coordinator for an independent study charter school in Northern California, Sarah Bailey, who started her own homeschool learning center, and Bill Lucia, President and CEO of EdVoice. This panel was moderated by PRI Senior Director of Education Studies, Lance Izumi. Thanks for joining us.
Our next program is on education reform, and it will be moderated by PRI's Senior Director at our Center for Education, Lance Izumi. So Lance is known to many, probably everyone here. Everyone in Sacramento knows Lance. He's the author of a recent book called Choosing Diversity, the diversity of learning models and education experiences that charter schools offer to students. This ranges from schools that serve students facing significant life challenges to those looking for a classical education and those that focus on a particular subject like the arts. As you know, charter schools were the target of a significant political attack last year. And Lance was one of the most vocal opponents in California on the new restrictions on charter school expansion and renewal that were enacted last year. One of the charges in last year's debate was that charter schools don't help students with special needs. In Lance's upcoming book called Mia's Story, he proves that this is false, and he shows how charter schools are uniquely situated to help students with special needs. He has brought together today a distinguished panel of policy experts, parents, and homeschooling teachers to explore how charter schools help special needs students and beat the odds. So please welcome Lance Izumi and our panel.
Well, thank you very much, Sally, for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate that. We're all very lucky to be working here at PRI and always to be under the leadership of our President and CEO, Sally Pipes. So thanks very much, Sally. I want to thank everybody here for taking their Wednesday to be with us to hear from our great speakers. I wanted to give a special shout out to a good friend of mine who's actually way in the back there, Valerie Spake, who actually is the one who gave me the recommendation that resulted in us having two of our speakers here today. So thank you very much, Valerie. I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak after my opening remarks. First, we have Carrie Carlson. And Carrie earned her bachelor's degree and her multiple subject teaching credential at Sacramento State. She taught at traditional public schools in the Bay Area and in the Elk Grove Unified School District. She's now the regional coordinator for an independent study charter school in Northern California. And as you will see from my remarks in a few minutes, one of the reasons why I wanted to have Carrie on our panel today is because of her personal history. Carrie's son was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and several other learning disabilities at the age of 5. After a few short months in kindergarten, it was apparent that the classroom was not the most suitable learning environment for him. And because of this, Carrie made the decision to homeschool. With the support of the local charter school, she now homeschools both her children. And this alternative approach to education has enhanced her life and the life of her children in ways that she could never really have imagined. So thank you very much, Carrie, for being here today. Next, we have Sarah Bailey. Sarah graduated from the University of Utah as a child life specialist. She and her husband, James, have 3 children and have homeschooled them. While many people think that homeschooling is a lonely pursuit of parents taking on the education of their children unaided, Sarah's experience shows that that perception is a myth. 6 years ago, she started the homeschooling learning center, Love of Learning, which now has 2 locations in Rockland and in Folsom. Love of Learning serves more than 500 families, and through her Love of Learning centers, Sarah has been able to help many families succeed with homeschooling their own children. So thank you very much, Sarah, for being here. And finally, we have my good friend Bill Lucia, who is the president and CEO of the education reform organization, EdVoice. Bill has served in a wide variety of top education positions at both the state and federal level, including as executive director of the State Board of Education, chief consultant for the Assembly Education Committee, and as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Education. So thank you, Bill, very much. Bottom line is, I always tell this to people, is that I don't know of anyone in education policy who has an encyclopedic knowledge of that policy as Bill Lucia has here in California. So thanks, Bill. But before I ask our panelists to speak, I want to start off by saying a few words about an important education trend that I see really picking up steam here in California in the coming years. As Sally alluded, many of you know perhaps the most important development in education here in California last year was the enactment into law of AB 1505, which will effectively put the brakes on any widespread expansion of charter schools in our state, and indeed will likely result in the reduction of the number of charter schools in the years ahead. Under this new law, school boards are given broad and vague rationales for disapproving proposed charter schools, including supposed negative fiscal impact of the charter school on the school district, determining that the charter is unlikely to serve the interests of the entire community, whatever that means, and duplication of programs at the regular public schools, regardless of whether those public schools have done a good job of implementing those programs. So the Charter Schools Development Center, headed by a mutual friend of ours, Eric Premack, says that the new law represents a near catastrophic setback to California's charter school sector and likely will curtail the growth of charter schools both individually and collectively, and will make renewal of charter school petitions more contentious and difficult, effectively inhibiting operational flexibility that actually is the reason why we have charter schools in the first place, because it facilitates innovation. So given this current political reality, at both the state level and then at the local levels here in California, and these new barriers especially to the establishment of charter schools, my view is that the one area of school choice in our state where we're going to see significant growth in the future is going to be in homeschooling. Over the last 20 years, the number of children being homeschooled has doubled in our country. Today, it is estimated that 2 million children across America are homeschooled. Here in California, up to 250,000 children are homeschooled. So homeschooling is made easier today due to the improvements in education technology, more and more online resources for parents, cooperatives amongst homeschooling families, and hybrid homeschooling models. Sally mentioned my last book, Choosing Diversity, and one of what I do in that book is look at 13 different charter schools from around the country. They all have very different models, and one of the schools that I profile in the book is actually here locally, Natomas Charter School, which is obviously in Natomas, just up the freeway here, and Natomas charter was founded by the current State Board of Education member, Dr. Ting's son. And the school has, even though it's called Natomas Charter School, it has 5 different academies that cater to very different sets of children. One of those academies is called Pursuing Academic Choices Together, or PACT, and it's geared specifically to homeschoolers. So in this program, parents instruct their children at home under the guidance of a certificated homeschool advisor, as well as by teachers in a classroom setting. So in addition to their schooling at home, these PACT students attend enrichment classes at the school's PACT campus. These classes include dance, music, choir, drama, hands-on art, computers, coding, social thinking, and science classes. And credentialed teachers teach all of these classes. So many of the assumptions, this is just one example of the many assumptions that people make about homeschoolers that actually turn out to be wrong. For example, many people think that all homeschoolers, for example, are white, when that's definitely not the case. More than 1/4 of homeschoolers in this country are actually Hispanic. It also turns out that, and many people think that the reason why people homeschool is because of religious reasons. That's also a myth. If you look at a recent federal report that just came out, it shows that the two biggest reasons why people homeschool their kids is because they have concern over the poor school environment of the regular public school, or they have dissatisfaction with the instruction that's taking place at that school. Another myth that people believe about homeschooling is that homeschooling is only for special, narrow types of children. For example, like kids who are gifted. And that's not true at all. Homeschooling is actually, has a wide breadth of students who are undertaking this option. A University of Washington report from last year actually found that if you look at the homeschooling spectrum, you get homeschoolers who are politically on the left and on the right. You get, in the economic spectrum, you have homeschoolers from wealthy families, you have homeschoolers from poor families, and from families of gifted children to families with children with special needs. And this last point is especially important since, as Sally mentioned about my upcoming book, is going to look at homeschooling, especially with regards to children with special needs, and specifically, it looks at the educational journey of one particular young woman named Mia Giordano, hence the name of the book, Mia's Journey. Because of her health issues, Mia developed severe learning disabilities that seriously impaired her ability to read, to write, and to speak. She had a terrible stutter. You ever watched that movie, The King's Speech, right? Think about Bertie, the future King George VI, and that was Mia. Actually, maybe probably worse. Because of her learning problems, she became the target of ridicule and bullying by her classmates. One of her classmates actually made up a song about Mia, and that went, "Mia is dumb, dumb, dumb." So, Mia had been in both public and private schools, and these conventional schools could not effectively address her learning issues. So by the middle of the third grade, Mia's parents decided that homeschooling was the best way to address her needs. And after deciding to homeschool Mia, Mia's mother discovered the Aerosmith program, which is a Canadian program that eschews the conventional method of emphasizing a person's strengths, learning strengths, to compensate for their weaknesses. So, the paradigm now in most public schools is that you have a person like Mia, what you do is you engage in compensating strategies, right? So you have strengths, because these kids have weaknesses, so whatever the strengths are, you use those strengths to compensate for whatever the weaknesses are in the brain. Well, this program, the Aerosmith program, flips that on its head, so to speak, and actually uses brain science research. I mean, imagine that, actually using brain science research to actually inform education, Well, that's a novel thing, right, Bill? Anyway, and what they do is that they look at the weak part of the brain, and they train the weak part of the brain through the use of exercise of increasing difficulty, train those weak parts of the brain to be as strong as the strong parts. So what you end up is a strong whole brain. Because what we do know about brain science is that the brain is plastic. It is malleable. It is constantly evolving and changing. So it is possible to do this. I should also mention that since this is a Canadian program, it's got a lot of scientific research behind it. And Sally's alma mater, University of British Columbia, UBC, actually did a recent study on the Aerosmith program showing just how effective it's been in all its many places where it's being tried. So anyway, Mia herself ended up entering an Aerosmith learning center, a small learning center in the Bay Area where she lives. And she was tested to evaluate her cognitive functions. And what they found was Mia had what they called several problems. One of them was she had motor symbol sequencing problems. Now that's a big, tough-sounding phrase, but motor symbol sequencing basically means that it made her difficult to do things like simply writing out the alphabet, because there was a problem with her viewing things and then being able to transfer that through her brain to her hand to write out the alphabet. She also had severe problems in the area of symbol relations, which involves connecting the concept and ideas and understanding logical and conceptual relationships. And what that all means is it made it hard for her to do things like read a clock and to understand the relationships between the hands. It's like she could not understand why this hand was the minute hand, or this hand was the hour hand, and this hand was the second hand, and what they all had to do with each other. The Aerosmith program, again, as I mentioned, addressed these issues by having these exercises focused on the weak parts of the brain and made them increasingly difficult. So one of the things she did for the area of motor symbol sequencing was to do tracing exercises. So she would be given large green symbols, all right, and given a red pen. And she'd have to trace inside the borders of that green symbol and not go outside of the line. And she kept having to do this over and over again until she was able to trace within the symbol. And then once she was able to do that consistently, then the symbol, the width of the symbol got narrower and narrower and narrower. So at the end, when she graduates from the Aerosmith program 4 years into the program, she's tracing green symbols using a special Japanese pen that makes a line so fine that you can only find them in certain art stores. And so to address her symbol relations problem, remember the clock problem? So she had to do exercises where she had to read clocks not just with an hour hand, a minute hand, and a second hand. She had to read clocks with up to 10 hands, with like month, year, decade, century. And she would have to be able to read these clocks like that, instantaneously, and be able to tell and repeat that to the teacher. So after doing these different types of exercises, and again, you can only you only get the results if you are able to basically train the brain over a long period of time, but it worked. And so by the time the 4 years she was in that program was over, she told me that she compared the time when she entered Aerosmith to how she left as being like being stuck in traffic in downtown San Francisco and then being on an open freeway in a Ferrari. Everything in her brain was moving at lightning speed. And so she was able to connect things. She was able to talk, of course. She was able to read. She was able to do all kinds. She didn't have to use her fingers to count anymore. She didn't have to use compensating strategies to try and get by. One of the compensating strategies she used to get by was that when people spoke, she had a problem with understanding the words that were coming out of people's mouths. So because there was a problem between what she was hearing and the connection with her brain. And so what she would do was she would look at your mouth and try and read your lips as your lips are moving, because that visual made it a better impression on her brain than simply hearing what you were saying. And so, but she didn't have to do that anymore. She didn't forget instructions. Her mother would tell her to do 3 or 4 things, and by the time she did the first one, she'd forget what the other 3 were. Now, I know a lot of you parents probably have that same problem, and that's not having to do with learning disabilities, but that's a whole different story. But now, after all that Aerosmith training that she got, she's now a very successful student at actually, interestingly enough, another charter school that I profile in my book called Design Tech Charter School out in Redwood City. And she is probably going to go to Notre Dame University. So here's a young woman who wasn't able to basically to speak, to read, to talk, and yet she's now probably going to go to one of the top universities in the country because she was able to be homeschooled, access this program that was not available in any of the conventional schools. And I asked one education psychologist who was longtime psychologist at the San Mateo school district, and I asked, what are the chances that this girl could have gotten Aerosmith, or any student who had these problems, get the Aerosmith program in not just the San Mateo school district, but any public school district in California? And she said and this is her quote to me. She said, "The only way Aerosmith would work in the public school system is if we had a complete paradigm shift. But the structure of the public education system is just not built to handle something like this. The teachers aren't trained, the belief system isn't there, and the funding isn't there." So, the point of it is that Aerosmith works, but the paradigm is against it. And that's why we need to have school choice. There are lots of school choice programs from around the country that have been effective, and we can talk about that that would bring the Aerosmith program to places like California and to people like Mia and others like her who can't afford it, because programs like Aerosmith are not free, right? And so how do you ensure equity? In my book, I talked to one of the directors of the medical school at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and she emphasized the need for equity. That this program that Mia was able to access and able to afford, we need to have other kids who don't have those means to be able to afford that too. And there are programs in Florida and other places that will, choice programs that are able to ensure that type of equity, and we can talk about that later. But with that, I think that's a good segue into introducing Carrie Carlson, whose personal situation in many ways kind of mirrored Mia's situation. So I want to ask Carrie to come up here and give us your thoughts.
So I think we have a little bit of a different story than Mia's, but I think that's really kind of the point, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all model that we're dealing with here, and we need to keep school choice open. So I'll just share a little bit about my journey with my son. So my son Garrett was diagnosed with multiple learning disabilities at the age of 5, and he is also on the autism spectrum. When he was in kindergarten, his teacher felt he just wasn't making the academic progress that was expected. He struggled with remembering letters and sounds and numbers, and making friends was also a challenge, as socially he just didn't connect with his peers. He developed a stutter. He cried every day when he came home from school, and started creating phantom illnesses to avoid getting on the bus. One morning, he diagnosed his 5-year-old self with prostate cancer, claiming he was too sick to learn that day. Because of the delays we were noticing, it was recommended he see a neurologist. He was subjected to a battery of tests, and those tests led to more tests, which led to more tests. In a few short months, in addition to his neurologist, Garrett met with a reading specialist, occupational therapist, vision therapist, and psychiatrist. Each one found a different problem, and each recommended a miraculous yet costly therapy. One day when he was 8, after a particularly difficult occupational therapy session, Garrett said, "Why do I have to do all this? I just feel like a science experiment." I followed up with his neurologist and mentioned his claim, and he told me something that was extremely powerful. He said, "Garrett is never going to learn the way other kids do." His exact words were to keep him as far away from therapists, teachers, and classrooms as possible. Take him to museums, on field trips, get outside, read books, and play games. He also added that kids with atypical development like Garrett are 5 to 15% more likely to have challenges with mental health, including depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. Quite frankly, this is the statistic that frightened me. We trudged through 2 more weeks of appointments before I realized the ridiculousness of my quest, and frustrated, I just gave up. I decided to listen to our neurologist and poured my heart and soul into homeschooling. We read books, we cooked together, played games, grocery shopped, joined a local co-op, and attended weekly park days and field trips, signed up for art classes, watched countless documentaries, hiked, went camping, and talked. And talked. And talked. Garrett can talk. Fast forward 11 years. Garrett is now a 16-year-old junior in high school on track to graduate with his diploma next year. He just got his learner's permit. He reads an abnormal amount of books. He writes with plans to be a published author. He designs video games and is especially good at finding errors in code. He has developed a love for karate and has advanced 6 belts in 1.5 years. Over the many years, people have asked us why we pursued this route and we didn't keep him in school, where they have the team of resources and special education programs to help. He could have an IEP and a team of specialists who would fix him. For me, there were many problems with this. First, when something needs to be fixed, it needs to be broken. He wasn't broken. He just learned differently. Classrooms are crowded. They are full of constant interruptions. Lessons are teacher-centric, with children as young as 4 years of age expected to sit still and understand lectures. Students are shown only one way to solve problems with no time for exploring alternative methods. Garrett was creative. He needed time to think, to process, to problem solve. The classroom was water and he was oil. Second, in classroom and special education settings, we found they wanted to repeatedly work on student's area of weakness to help him improve. And most adults would shudder if subjected to this same philosophy. It made more sense to us to focus on what he loved, using his strengths to improve those weaknesses. So for Garrett, karate has replaced occupational therapy, while video game design is strengthening his basic math and reading skills. Third, we can all agree that there have been tremendous advancements in technology, especially in the realm of education. There was a time when teachers with specialized degrees were absolutely necessary to help students achieve success. That trend is rapidly changing, and computer-based programs are being released daily that adapt to students' individual needs. These programs are easily monitored by a parent in a comfortable and loving and distraction-free environment. They can be accessed anywhere at any time. And it is with one of these programs Garrett has learned to read. Finally, Garrett was dealt with challenges in life and was always going to struggle academically. Based on the neurologist's claim of increased incidence of depression, anxiety, and suicide for kids like ours, my husband and I felt that burdening Garrett with the academic and social pressures present in a traditional school setting was a recipe for a mental health disaster. We wanted to work on building character, self-esteem, perseverance, ethics of hard work. So when faced with challenges, he had the skills to work through them and not give up. And in order to instill these character traits, we needed time. Time to let him develop at his own pace, independent of comparisons to peers and arbitrary grade level standards. Time the brick and mortar school environment just doesn't afford. Utilizing resources available to everyone, we designed a homeschool program that worked for him, and it took only space, love, and time. In my current role, I talk to parents every single week who have kids like Mia and Garrett. I share our story, our resources, our failures, and our victories. One thing all of these parents have in common is the desire to help their children succeed. There is definitely no quick fix or one-size-fits-all miracle cure. But with the rise of homeschooling in America, more and more people are looking for alternatives to traditional classrooms. Homeschooling a child with special needs hasn't been a burden. It's been an absolute blessing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie, for your incisive and very heartfelt remarks. We really appreciate that. I want to now ask Sarah to come up here and to share your thoughts.
So my daughter was in 3rd grade. She was at a wonderful local elementary school. It was a new school in a high-scoring district in a fairly affluent area. She was a quiet, sweet, hardworking, respectful student who was coming home with 2 hours of homework every night. She asked her teacher if she could stand up while she worked at her desk, and that was not allowed. Her teacher told me not to have her read books above her grade level, or else when she got older, she wouldn't be able to test out of those books through the accelerated reading program. It made me wonder, what is accelerated about holding my daughter back educationally? And what were they doing 6 hours a day at school that required an additional 2 hours of work at home? The time she spent doing homework or at school equaled an adult workday. And mind you, she's in 3rd grade. I decided to claim my daughter's childhood and time back. So the following year, we started our journey into homeschooling. One of the questions I get asked most, and I think most homeschoolers get asked this all the time, is, what about your children's socialization? This is something that homeschooling families take very seriously and work to provide a lot of opportunities for their children to make friends, go on outings with other families, take classes. So the first few years, I started a co-op with some other moms, and this eventually led into starting a learning center where children could come year after year and have a community. In public school, children only take classes with other children their own age, as if their birthday is the most important thing about them. They are put in a class with 30 other children who may or may not be at their level academically or share any of their interests, yet we move them along at the same speed as if they were cars on an assembly line. We expect the teacher to teach each child to know them, to love them, to help them attain their highest potential. So how can one person be stretched this thin and still do an outstanding job? And yet so many really put forth a heroic effort that we're burning our teachers out at an alarming rate. We know that between 40 and 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years, and 9.5% of teachers leave before their first full year of teaching is through. We are concerned with bullying at school, and yet the student-to-teacher ratio makes it impossible to control this problem. I'm sure many of us in this room remember those kids that would harass other students when the teacher wasn't looking. 20% of public school students say they have been bullied. Of those students, 2/3 of them become bullies themselves. And 30% of students who have been bullied reported bringing a weapon to school at some point to protect themselves. With homeschooling, children can move at their own speed, at their own and with their own interests. They don't have to stop doing their math problem because the rest of the class is moving on. Or they can spend all day working on a drawing, building a fort, playing Legos, or coding a game, because no one is telling them that they have to do what the rest of the class is doing. Their teacher, also known as their parent, can really focus one-on-one, cater to their educational needs and talents. Bullying is almost a non-issue. As families go on outings with other families, parents are watching their children and helping them learn social etiquette. Children learn to talk to people of all ages and not just their peers. And I believe this is a better way to socialize our children than the dog-eat-dog world of the school playground. With homeschooling, parents become the models for moral, social, and ethical standards, not their peers who really know nothing more about the world than the few years they've lived on it. Siblings become better friends as they spend their days together playing and studying. Parents get to know their children on a much deeper level as they spend time together working and studying as a family. We all know that the family unit is the building block of any society, and homeschooling builds strong families. Is it a sacrifice? Of course, especially for some children. It usually means one parent stays at home and handles most of the schooling. Is it a fit for every family? No, but that is why it's important to value educational diversity and freedom of choice. Another question people ask me is, how do I teach my children subjects that I'm not an expert in? Well, I hire them. That's why I started a learning center. So with the rise of homeschooling, there are many options nowadays to assist families. So at my learning center, children can take classes on pretty much any subject that will help them meet the state standards or their interests. There's also online classes. Many universities offer online classes designed for high school students. There's almost too many choices in the marketplace for one parent to decide. It can be overwhelming, but the blessing of finding something that works for your child is amazing. So there's 3 models of education in the world. The conveyor belt, which I already talked a little bit about, which is our public schools. They teach you what to think. Everyone is the same, and getting the right answer is what it takes to be a good student, and it values conformity. The professional system teaches people when to think. This system produces our doctors, our lawyers, and our dentists. They are experts in their fields, and we trust and value their knowledge. The last model of education is a leadership education. This system trains leaders, thinkers, artists, entrepreneurs, inventors, and statesmen. In this model, students are taught how to think. They go on to inspire and motivate others to elevate society. Our society thrives when all three models are present. But right now, the conveyor belt is the main system of education. And we are suffering as a society because of it. A homeschool child is much more likely to receive a leadership education. Family discussions, time for reflection, reading literature and history by authors, and not out of a textbook, help develop a leader. Another question I get asked often is, how do you know you're meeting the state standards? The state standards are there to make sure that each child gets a basic education. And I am grateful that in the state of California, homeschooling charter schools are there to help families meet those standards. I would argue that most homeschooling families dive deeper than the state standards. A state standard for sixth grade history says, locate and describe the major river systems and discuss the physical settings that support permanent settlement. So along with reading about ancient Egypt, we built the Nile in our backyard. We flooded it and saw what happened when the seeds grew. A fourth grade state standard says, identify the locations of Mexican settlements in California and those of other settlements, including Fort Ross and Sutter's Fort. So as a family, we went with a homeschooling group to Sutter's Fort and stayed the night and did the whole reenactment of how they would have lived as we studied that part of California history. A high school state standard says, analyze the Nazi policy of pursuing racial purity, especially against the European Jews, its transformation into the final solution, and the Holocaust that resulted in the murder of 6 million Jewish civilians. So we took our children, when they were younger, to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. As well, fairly recently, we took a trip to Poland and Germany to study the atrocities that happened during World War II. So rather than just book or video learning, these real-life experiences have a profound effect and help them retain what they learn about the subject. Also, homeschooling children learn at a young age how to manage their time, deal with boredom, and become self-motivated and think for themselves. Colleges actively seek out homeschoolers because they have seen that they are more prepared for college and self-directed learning. A 2016 study by the National Home Education Research Institute indicates homeschoolers scored between 15 and 30 percentage points higher on standardized academic achievement tests. Research also indicates students who receive a home-based education usually scored higher on ACT and SAT. These studies help explain why homeschool graduates are frequently recruited by colleges. While those who oppose homeschooling challenge the quality of a homeschool curriculum, the truth is that homeschoolers are often outperforming their peers. Thanks to customization of education, these students are better prepared for a post-secondary degree. Are there holes in my children's education? I'm sure there are. But my goal was to create lifelong learners and not someone who just memorizes facts and then forgets them after they take the test. Some ways that Carrie and I have both helped our students and our own children retain information was through simulations. We held a Civil War simulation, which was like a giant game of capture the flag on steroids, and it just happened to be pouring down rain that day. It gave them a small taste of how miserable those soldiers would have been and some of the heartache they would have faced. We've also done simulations on the spreading of a virus, the stock market crash, and Nazi Germany, and many, many others. After the simulations, we always have a debriefing where the students share what they have experienced, they listen to others, and they learn and gain a better understanding of how the world works. These are lessons they will never forget, and there is no test at the end of it. It's just gaining knowledge for the love of learning. So that daughter that I pulled out of public school for fourth grade is now 21. She's a senior at a very prestigious college, graduating with an animation degree. The year she applied for that program, 200 students applied, and 11 were admitted. She was the youngest. I believe that her tailored education helped prepare her for this rigorous program, and she has thrived in college. My second daughter is taking time off from college to do humanitarian work in Florida. She developed a passion for humanitarian work as she spent half of her senior year of high school teaching English to underprivileged children in India. So my son is a junior in high school, and he runs his own auto detailing business. I brought his business cards in case anybody wants their car to look as good as new. So homeschooling has been one of the greatest blessings to our family. And my hope is that all families have the choice to do what is best for their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate that very much. It's interesting. I actually, a few years ago, used to do Civil War reenactment. And so I was the only Japanese guy on the battlefield. And I will tell you this, even though that I was actually in the artillery. And so, you can imagine. And I remember, when the opposing ranks were coming over and everything's scripted, right? So, one side loses, one side wins, and depending on, what time of day we're doing the battle. Our side was supposed to lose, and so I'm manning the cannons, and my lieutenant tells me, Lance, when they come over the battlements, I want you to fall across the gunpowder, because sometimes they're supposed to stop firing, but they get so excited they sometimes don't listen, and if the sparks hit the gunpowder, we all get blown to kingdom come. And so I said, so you want me to fall across the gunpowder? Well, aye, sir. So anyway, with that, I want to introduce Bill Lucia, who in addition to being, all these great positions Bill has had, he's also the father of triplets. So he knows something about parenting.
Thanks, Lance. I have 5 kids, including triplets. Actually, I have 4 sophomores in part because of homeschooling. The youngest, we're insane. We have triplets bookended between an older and a youngest, and so the youngest, because of homeschooling, caught up to the triplets, and we've been blessed to have the opportunity to have choice because of the jobs that I've had, and my wife having been a teacher and been able to be at home and know how to take full advantage of what the law allows, or when there's a gray shaded area. We're fighting to keep some of these programs viable. With what happened with the charter law last year, the legislature and the governor, in their infinite cowardness, decided to just put a 2-year moratorium on this kind of thing in terms of not being able to grow any further, supposedly. But politically, it's because they haven't yet figured out how to drive a stake in the heart. There was an attempt 20 years ago when the charter school, some people are nodding, when the charter school cap was lifted to sacrifice what they called independent study models, homeschool models, at the altar of just bricks and mortar charter schools, and that was going to be the political trade-off. And while there was, as Lance said, unfortunately, 1505 last year, it created a new policy regime which will necessarily, well, I think he quoted another person that we have high respect for, saying they'll necessarily flatten or atrophy the charter school movement of bricks and mortar charter schools because of the ability for local school districts to deny a charter school petition outright or a renewal of a charter, that the legislature put a 2-year moratorium on distance learning and distance authorizing. So right now, if I were to hang you by your toenails and you were to answer, what's the difference between distance learning and distance authorizing, 120 knuckleheads over there don't know. Okay? And so they, in their brains, they just hear the word distance and they just hear, oh, that's bad. And there's some geography differential from maybe somebody's doing oversight and the kid learning. And whether it's curriculum access by an individual student through a homeschooling model, or in the issue of charter schools, distance authorizing is the authorizer is the school district or the county office of education, and the proximity of that authorizer to where the kids actually are. And the notable bad top of the fold newspaper articles that have been the genesis of a lot of efforts to stifle this is Eastern Sierra school districts that are actually quite small, that have authorized charter schools in the Inland Empire, in Los Angeles County and Orange and San Diego counties, and they argue that it's not correct to be able to have distance authorizing that far away, and the schools have been able to get not only administrative oversight fees but even MOUs with the schools. That, by the way, when they're authorizing, the schools that are getting authorized are bricks and mortar charter schools. They're not authorizing distance learning schools. They're authorizing bricks and mortar charter schools. So the school districts that they're nested with in San Diego County, LA County, Orange County, and Inland Empire, they're frustrated because they see kids in their neighborhood not attending their local school. They see kids as an ATM machine, and they're going, oh my God, we're declining enrollment, where are they going? They're not going to the private Catholic school or whatever. And they're not even being homeschooled. They're going to bricks and mortar charter schools, so that's created a lot of angst among the people who have the monopoly of the government-run school system, the 19th century school system that you heard about. That's the conveyor belt system and worked. That's, when California became a state and we were in the Industrial Revolution and having that conveyor belt model made a lot of rational sense. It wasn't necessarily to have every child reach his or her full potential, but it was to get a basic education. And that's what's written into our Constitution, is this concept of a basic education. What you've heard about here is an opportunity for kids to get more and not be satisfied with a minimum standard of a basic education, but to have a whole different concept of kids learning, which is to reach their full potential. And actually overcome the model, if you will, the conveyor belt model has system design in it that's calcified over 2 centuries, or a century and a half, of delivery, pedagogy, methodology, modality of delivering services. And it's very apparent when you talk about equity. So if you're talking about equity in the terms of gifted kids, I think all kids are gifted, by the way. So whether they have different learning styles or not, they're gifted, and God gave them a brain. They still have the human genome. The DNA, the human DNA genome has not morphed. Okay, so they're still human beings. They have a brain, and as Lance said, there's a lot of brain research, neuroscience research that talks about how the brain is growing all the way into the late teen years. And in the early stages, there's a lot of development that's going on and a lot of ways to strategize how to move away from traditional conveyor belt learning modalities to address the needs of all kids. Just a quick little anecdote. You mentioned Elk Grove. That's where I live. We had horrifying experiences. My wife and I were the first people to not sign off on an IEP when we first moved. I was working in the United States Senate. I helped negotiate the IDA reauthorization in 2005. Working in the United States Senate for the chairman of the committee, of the HELP committee. And I come to California, and I'm told that my daughter, who was one of the triplets, who had a drooping eyelid that had to have surgery and have it lifted, and we didn't know at the time that, plus the fact that she had too many teeth for her mouth, and she had speech and some vision issues, that I was told in an IEP meeting, in all sincerity, and they believed it, the bureaucrats in Elk Grove Unified said, here's the plan. We're going to monitor your daughter in 6 weeks, and we'll come back in 6 months and see how it's going. They wanted me to sign a document to say that was the sum total of what my child would be entitled to in basic education and IDA, which is a crock. And I refused. I took all 5 kids out. I took all 5 kids out of school, and because we could, and sent them to a private school. And I had not only the school district registrar who lived in my cul-de-sac, the principal of the school, the superintendent of the school district, and the county superintendent of schools all called me personally and begged me to come back and go to any school I wanted to in Elk Grove. And I said, shame, shame, shame. Just because I have the stature, the job bio or whatever, and you want me back in your school? No, not going to happen. So we entered a whole regime of figuring out, okay, well, now what are you going to do? So guess what? My job at a nonprofit doesn't pay enough, to send 5 kids to, private school. We got to go to Plan B, So I'll make it short. The wrapping it up to a couple things. I'll make some other inflammatory comments to jolt you awake in the afternoon. We have a son at Cal Poly who went to Horizon Charter School, independent study / blended learning with a learning center model, and he's an first-year electrical engineer, top of his class, electrical engineering at Cal Poly. Double black belt in karate, very socially connected with all kinds of friends, composes music, and as well as building a synthesizer for music. The 4 kids that had other interests went on to follow dad and do water polo and swimming. And I didn't push them into it. They wanted to, and they begged Mom, we want to go, once it's time for high school, we don't want to do the homeschooling, charter school, / blended learning, independent study, blah, 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 whatever would work, because that's what we did. Various charter schools, by the way. Not all charter schools are made equal, and if it's not working for your kid, change. And go fight for your kid and fight for the opportunity, and that's what we did. And we ended up succumbing to 4 kids begging. Imagine 4 sophomores, 4 teenagers saying, I want to go to the local comprehensive high school. So we did that. And this January, we pulled 4 kids out because 2 of the kids did not, strike that. One of our daughters didn't have a regular math teacher since August of this school year. 30-day substitute, permit teachers, rolling, no math teacher. One teacher would come in once a week with a packet, and that was it. And then January, we were promised by the principal, that's going to change. January rolled up after the holidays, and not just one, but another of my kids. We have a good sample size, 4 sophomores, we know what's going on. And actually, teachers are awesome. We want a teacher. We want a teacher who can teach the content to the kid. Because I've paid taxes for 27 years at that house. Used to be cow pasture, now they build houses, and we paid our share and educate our kids. No, they're not educating our kids, so it's a fraud. It's an absolute fraud. And we said, no, 4 kids, taking them out. So we're back to Horizons again. And we don't know what we're doing after the end of the year. But we're actually looking for real estate in other places to say, because I do have a choice. And a lot of the beyond the charter school, which was seen as a logistical legal covering, the interesting is there's also a whole nother domain called hardcore homeschooling, and that was made available in a completely unintended, which was a lawsuit with CPS down in LA County, where there was a large family. I think there were 6 or 8 children. The oldest daughter had a beef because the dad was not letting her date a certain boy, and they were homeschooled. And the predicate of it was to some kind of a child abuse thing, mental, not physical abuse, but some mental thing with the daughter and the dad or whatever. Not that the LA County failed. CPS failed. It was taken to the appellate court, and they didn't even realize what the appellate court would do. They would write into case law for the law of California that homeschooling is actually constitutional. And until then, for those of you who are old timers, knew you had to freak out, that you had to file an affidavit, send it to CD, and hope to God that the superintendent of public instruction never really came after you, because you would have to be somehow linked to a school with an accredited private school of some sort. So what I'm doing now is, in my day job at EdVoice, is trying to expose the fraud that's happening. Here's the thing. The governor cares a lot about trying to break the bondage of the school to prison pipeline, right? And to his credit, okay? And one thing he realizes, to his credit, is that prisoners didn't forget how to read. Okay, let me say it again. Prisoners didn't forget how to read. They were never taught how to read. I don't know if you know, overwhelmingly, the people that are in prison are illiterate, and the public education system failed them. Think about this. People come from all over the world to fill jobs. They fly into SFO in Manette Airport, right? H-1B visas. With all the friction that everybody says in the political divide in our country, there's a lot of coziness with Silicon Valley and the Trump administration and the Congress when it comes to H-1B visas, okay? And people that come to our nation, and even people that are advocates of the DACA bill and whatever. What's that all about? Think. Higher education. California is a destination point for higher education, right? We have a stellar, world-class higher education system. Have you ever heard of people fighting to get in line to come to our K-12 school system? No. Do you know that right now in the budget, the per pupil funding is $17,500 a student? $17,500 a student. You said 30 kids, right? I'll just do the math. Lucia's are good at math. It's over $500,000. $525,000, I think, if I do the math. $525,000. Teachers aren't getting paid $525,000. Where's the money going? Well, what do you know? The state auditor did an audit at the request of, we helped draft it, other legislators submitted to the audit committee. They were going to do it as a discretionary audit. They finally had to, there was a lot of, oh, you better not do that, you better not do that. Finally got it through. Legislators asked for it, including the budget. To his credit, a Democrat from San Francisco, Assemblyman Ting, chairman of the budget committee, and Shirley Weber from San Diego said, we want to know where the money's going, because if there's more money available for kids, and we're changing the formula, so more money is going to help the more disadvantagedness that comes along with poverty and English learners and additional need, okay, is it actually getting there? So what did the state auditor say? They did a forensic audit of just 3 school districts, and they said that just in 1 year alone, $300 million is unaccounted for. $300 million. And because they have such a high standard to be able to publish their findings, they have a 50% plus 1 standard for forensic audits, and so all they could put in was billions in the report of what it extrapolated would be. But because they actually can't figure out where the money is, they don't even have a uniform metric to gauge where the money is, and we know it's getting through the controller's office. It's coming out of your wallets, right? Coming out of your wallets, your property taxes, general purpose taxes that are funded, fund the school system, and it goes from Sacramento down to the school district in a big dump truck. But does it ever follow the kid in a backpack to the classroom with a teacher? We don't know. And what the billions actually is, I had a little mouse tell me, it was back of the envelope calculated to be $11 billion a year. That's supposed to be specifically, the term of art is increase or improve services for the disadvantaged kids is unaccounted for, and whether it's actually getting there. $11 billion a year in California, every year. So to their credit, and the legislature knows there's a problem, the governor knows there's a problem, they're working on that, and hopefully at least we'll start out with figuring out where the money's going. And because things do cost money, these services aren't for free. A lot of people, families make sacrifices. They change their whole way of the future they're looking, because everybody loves their kid. And people love their kid whether they're affluent or they're dirt poor. They love their kid. And they understand there's a fraud going on in public education in California. When I was last in the building working as a chief consultant for Assembly Ed, Lance, you mentioned one of my past jobs, there was a big concern. I had Willie Brown, Kurt Pringle, and John Burton in my office. Those of you who may know those names, in my office, asking for 2 things. I still remember the bill. I was like, John Burton, with a lot of profanity, said, can't you analyze my bill? And I still remember the bill, AB 1504, to actually require spelling to be put in the curriculum. It had to have a law. That's how bad we had gotten in California, okay? So think about that pinpoint, okay? And think about, at that time, what we were worried about in California was the mid-90s, and we were tied with Mississippi and Louisiana and only above Washington, D.C. in reading, 4th grade NAEP scores, okay? This was the mid-90s. Do you know where we are today? Worse. It's a fraud. We are now in a situation where barely half the kids can read at grade level. At 3rd grade, if you look at poor kids, it's barely a third. If you're an African-American boy in California, you are better off with a one-way ticket on a Greyhound to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. outperforms California. Mississippi outperforms California. So we have this thing, you mentioned the Civil War, I just got to say it. I know you're coming over here, give me the hook. Okay, so here's the thing. There's this thing about California, like we weren't in the Civil War. When you do the little battlefield, there's no, bear flag rebellion thing, right? And we think we're so cool because we weren't caught up in all that. But the thing is, California absolutely has been caught up in it. Racism is thrown around, equity is thrown around, but we functionally have Jim Crow public education. And as long as it works for the elite classes that have liberal white guilt and live behind gated communities, it's all fine. But for everybody else, it's just so sad to be you. Hope it works for you. Maybe you'll find an awesome public school teacher, an awesome public school, career for your kid, and that'll be great. But more often than not, that's not going to be, and they're overtaxed or they're going to leave because they don't feel they're being supported and they don't know where all the money's going. $500,000 to every classroom in California, I don't see it happening. So I'll leave you with that. Those are observations. And the challenge is this 2-year thing. Don't forget, distance learning and distance authorizing are two different things. So when you hear about a distance authorizer making bank off of some charter schools and whether that's fair or not, and if there's proper oversight or this or that or the other thing, say, okay, fine. But what does that have to do with distance learning and blended learning and independent study? Those are two different things. So why are these people, because it's the blind leading the blind over there, and it's the 19th century conveyor belt system, and that's all they knew. And everybody went to school, so they think they're an expert. And I'll stop there because I got the hook. All right. All right.
I could listen to Bill Lucia forever. And so, and also, too, I like the fact when you said that when you became the head of a nonprofit, then you had to rethink, sending your kids to private school. Working for a nonprofit, Sally always says we work for psychic income, right, Sally? So, anyway, thank you very much, Bill. Always terrific remarks. I think we have one question. We have 5 minutes? Okay, maybe one or two questions. Yes. Well, let me go back there. You haven't spoken yet.
Congratulations to you guys. You're all fantastic. Agents have changed. You guys are change agents. You're going to make it happen. I'm so thrilled. And so I have 4 sons, and luckily they all got by in California public school, only because we shopped like crazy in the Bay Area for the best school district, and we saved our money and got in there, got our home. Reasonably now they're $10 million. Silicon Valley deal. But our boys are all successful. But the point is that we're not going to get ahead as long as there is fraud, not only in the legislature, but in the entire school system, as far as I'm concerned. Because I worked on as a volunteer for our school board, and I found out where the money goes. And here's one of the many rat holes. So in my business, I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I did some deals with the state to provide office space. That was a very lucrative thing. I would come all the way from Burlingame, my home, to here to do deals with the state. And I found out that there were several million square feet of office space, expensive space, where people at the state school system have their feet up on their desk with nothing to do. And in fact, there were guys there, this is about 1990s, from 1970 involved in busing when there was a big controversy in California. We had to have busing, get every kid mixed in with every other kind of kid. Well, it didn't work out. It was another fraud. But these people were never let go, never transferred, and there were several thousand of them of that type, not all of them busing, but sitting around. There's part of the rat hole. So what we have to do is infiltrate at the base level and do like the left-wing people do, is they have captured the school boards now. You should see the people who come into San Francisco and get elected to the school board. They are so far left of Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. And that they moved up then, and then they get elected to county supervisor, then state assembly, then state senate, and higher. So until we learned some tactics from Saul Alinsky, probably, people like that, we're not going to beat this because the kids are not getting educated about the real world at school level. They've captured the children. Well, that's all I got to say.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and that's all very true. Let me get a quick comment. Let me ask Bill real quickly to respond to the issue of who gets elected to school boards here in California. I
don't know if this is. Oh, it is. You're right on that the school boards are complicit, and the big state. They're actually stakeholder groups that work on having campaign contribution limits of $100 to school board candidates, so that the adult interest, just the word association, you name it, you can, whichever group of adults gets together, and then they have an outsized influence when they pool their money together to help elect candidates, and it's the fox guarding the hen house. So they have control over the school budgets and the decisions that get made in order to perpetuate the status quo. And we have a constitutional right of association. We don't do a good, so nothing against people who have a self-interest, But we don't do enough of civic education to talk about how important it is when you vote on March 3rd to really look at school board races and do some homework on that, because we are all guilty of it if we aren't being very careful at looking at who the candidates are for local school board.
And I would love to take more questions, but because, as the gentleman said, we had such a great panel of people who were here, agents of change, people who are going to, hopefully change the character of education here in California over the next years. We just ran a bit long in our presentation, so I want to thank our fantastic panel, and I want everybody to give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Special thanks to Carrie Carlson, Sarah Bailey, Bill Lucia, and Lance Izumi. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.